Today, we will look at a story that took place back in 1992. 19-year-old Milica van Doorn was a resident of Zaandam in the Netherlands who was attacked after missing her bus. It took more than 20 years for the authorities to find the person responsible for this crime, and the development of DNA testing methods played a major role. Milica was from an average, ordinary family. She lived with her parents and two sisters in Zaandam. Zaandam is a city in the province of North Holland. It is the main city of the municipality of Zaanstad and received city rights in 1811. It is located on the river Zaan, just north of Amsterdam. Milica was not a troublesome child, did not do anything illegal, and was friendly with everyone. She had just graduated from high school, where she had a good reputation. She thought her life was just beginning and that a great future awaited her. But unfortunately, one summer night changed everything. The whole country found out about Milica, and there was a lot of attention about what happened to her.
Milica van Doorn.
Milica van Doorn.
Milica van Doorn.
Milica van Doorn. Milica van Doorn.
Milica van Doorn.
Van Milica van Doorn.
Milica van Doorn.
On the evening of Sunday, June 7th, 1992, Milica was one of the guests at her friend's birthday party. The party was held in one of the apartments located in this building. The place looked the same in 1992, and not much has changed since, except that the trees are taller. The birthday celebration was not yet over when Milica decided to go home. She was having a good time with her close friends, but since she lived in another part of town, she had to leave while public transportation was still functioning. Shortly before midnight, she said goodbye to her friends and went outside. Since Milica was going to take the bus home, she walked to the nearest bus stop, which was about 160 yards away. This bus stop, too, hadn't changed much in 3 decades. As investigators later speculated, when Milica arrived at the stop, she realized that the last bus had left a half hour ago. She knew the bus schedule, but did not consider that because of the Christian holiday of Pentecost that day, the last bus had left half an hour earlier than usual. Milica had another way to get home. It was by taking the train. The train station was on the same street as the bus stop. To get there, Milica would have had to walk about half a mile. However, she never returned home. She often slept over at her friends' houses, so her parents didn't immediately sound the alarm. There is a church near the train station and a pond next to it. The next day, Monday morning, the pastor of St. Joseph's Church was taking a morning walk and was shocked to see a body floating in the pond. He called the police at 8:54 a.m. Detectives arrived on the scene within 5 minutes, and that morning the Van Doorn family was overcome with despair and sadness. The body recovered from the water was Milica's. On first examination, investigators realized they were dealing with a crime. There were various injuries on her neck, face, and body, including several stab wounds. She was also partially undressed. The perpetrator wanted to hide the body so that passers-by could not see it, so he placed stalks of reeds over it, but this idea failed, and the body was found. Milica's passing was a great ordeal for her family. She had been young, dreaming of a beautiful future, but now her parents were forced to mourn her. They didn't understand who could have done something like this to their daughter, and why. Investigators gained some clarity about the motive for the crime after an autopsy was performed. The medical examiner found semen and pubic hair inside Milica's body. Although the body was removed from the pond, there was no water in Milica's lungs. This meant that she had passed somewhere else, and it was not until after her passing that the body was attempted to be hidden in the pond. It was also unclear exactly when Milica lost her life. It could have been shortly after she left the party, but it could also have been hours after that. Since her body was in the water, the time of her passing could not be determined by body temperature. The pond was the place where the perpetrator disposed of the body, but it was not the place where Milica lost her life. The police were trying to find the crime scene, where investigators believed that because of the serious nature of Milica's wounds, traces should have been left behind. One piece of evidence that could point to the crime scene, and possibly the perpetrator himself, was that one of Milica's shoes was missing. Police distributed informational flyers that, among other things, reported that one of Milica's shoes was missing, and authorities asked whoever found it to report it to detectives. The second shoe would eventually be found, but we'll speak about that a bit later. It was 1992, and DNA research was still in its early stages of development, so DNA samples from Milica's body at that time were not very helpful to the police in their investigation. The detectives first talked to Milica's family. They wanted to find out if Milica was in conflict with someone, or if there was an obsessive man whom she rejected and who could not accept rejection. But according to the family members, Milica was not in conflict with anyone. Her personal life was fine too. She dated a guy who was her peer, and they almost never fought. After learning that Milica was at a birthday party before she passed away, investigators decided to interview all of the guests invited there. Milica's boyfriend was among them. Numerous interviews ultimately yielded nothing. Everyone who was at the party told the same story, saying Milica had left shortly before midnight and was supposed to get on a bus to the neighborhood where she lived. None of Milica's friends knew that the last bus had left before she got to the bus stop that day. Now, almost everyone has a cell phone, but things were different in 1992, so it was impossible to keep in touch with Milica to find out if she got on the bus or not, or if she made it home. Having ruled out Milica's friends as potential suspects, police officers began looking for possible witnesses to the crime. They went door to door and interviewed residents of the area where the body was found. This yielded a lot of information, but very little specifics. Several people said they heard a woman screaming at night, but it stopped quickly, so they didn't give it much thought. There were also witnesses who said they saw a man of Turkish appearance riding a bicycle to the place where Milica's body was found. Investigators decided to take a closer look at members of the Turkish community living in the Kogerveld neighborhood where Milica's body was found. Some young men from the Turkish community had problems with the law and were the focus of police attention, but months later, the investigators were still unable to identify the suspect. All of the men they spoke to denied being near the pond at the night of the crime. As a result, the investigation was deadlocked. 6 months after the crime, a roofer repairing the roof of St. Joseph's Church found Milica's second shoe, which had been there all along. It was impossible to get to the roof of the church without a ladder, so it was concluded that the perpetrator had, for some reason, thrown one of Milica's shoes onto the roof while he was at the pond. Even if there were any other marks on the church's roof, they had long since been erased by wind and adverse weather. Months passed and then years, but Milica van Doorn's case remained unsolved. This was another factor that deeply hurt her parents. After all, whoever had so coldly and brutally taken their daughter from them remained free and enjoyed life, while the lives of the Van Doorn family were irrevocably changed. Over the years, the police have returned to this case. Investigators had repeatedly interviewed residents of the area where the body was found, hoping that someone would remember something and provide previously unknown information, but this did not happen. Milica's story was also discussed in various television programs, after which the police received calls with clues, but that also ultimately did not help to get any closer to the suspect. Nevertheless, the authorities had samples of the perpetrator's DNA at their disposal, which, you might say, were lying in wait as DNA testing technology was rapidly advancing. Medical analysts speculated that the perpetrator must be a man of Turkish descent who probably lived in the Kogerveld area in 1992 and was between 16 and 30 years old at the time. About 200 men voluntarily submitted buccal swabs for DNA testing, but it yielded nothing. Almost 20 years after Milica's passing, in April 2012, a momentous event occurred that further shaped the investigation. Thanks to an amendment to a law in the Netherlands, DNA kinship testing became possible. Based on the results of the autopsy, the evidence, and the behavior of the perpetrator, a psychological portrait of him was drawn. The police profiler believed that Milica was the accidental victim of a frustrated man who was very resentful of women in general. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The perpetrator may have spoken to her very briefly, but apparently he grabbed her violently right afterwards and began threatening her. After satisfying his baser needs, he realized that Milica would identify him, so he decided to take her life. For the first few weeks after committing the crime, he remained silent. Perhaps he pretended to be sick so he wouldn't see anyone or go out, because he had scratches left on his body after his fight with Milica. He is a man with a hot temper who takes criticism poorly, is selfish, has few friends, and treats girlfriends poorly. The police profiler believed the offender was between 18 and 25 years old in 1992. In April 2016, the investigation into Milica van Doorn's case was reopened. While there had been no serious reports for more than 20 years, a specific report suddenly appeared in June 2016, mentioning the names of two Turkish men. Both of these men had lived in Zaandam in 1992, and they had both left shortly after Milica's passed away. It had to be ascertained whether the two men had anything to do with the crime. It was not easy. They turned out to be in Turkey, and it took more than a year to track them down and take the necessary steps. However, DNA analysis of the two men showed no matches with the DNA found on Milica's body. In 2017, 25 years after Milica's passed away, authorities decided to use DNA typing technology to try to identify the suspect. Scientific tests on DNA samples found on Milica's body showed that the DNA almost certainly belonged to a man with Turkish ancestry. Based on this information, in November 2017, 133 men of Turkish origin who in 1992 lived in the area where the body was found, as well as in neighboring areas, received a request from the police asking for a voluntary DNA sample for research. For this genealogy study, the Netherlands Institute of Forensic Medicine was to analyze the Y chromosome pattern, which is the DNA pattern that is passed unchanged from father to son. In sending out the request for voluntary DNA, authorities promised that the samples would only be used in the investigation of Milica van Doorn and would subsequently be destroyed. Police also stressed that none of the men to whom the request was sent were suspects in the case. Almost all of the 133 men of Turkish descent who received the request agreed to voluntarily provide a DNA sample for testing, but there were several who refused to do so. A police statement said that 126 of the 133 men provided their DNA. A police spokesman called it fantastic, saying that the fact that so many men agreed to cooperate was respectful and made it clear that they all wanted justice to be done and the case solved. It took about a month to analyze the DNA samples, but it was worth the wait. The DNA of the man who attacked Milica 25 years ago was not among the samples examined by these experts. However, among them was a DNA sample belonging to a man who did not even know he was related to a perpetrator. On Monday, December 10, 2017, police announced the arrest of the suspect. He turned out to be a 47-year-old man named Hussein, whose last name and image were not circulated according to local laws. He was one of 7 people who did not submit their DNA for verification. However, Hussein had a brother who had nothing to hide and who handed over his DNA to the authorities without realizing where it would lead. By identifying family ties and compiling a list of people who refused to give DNA to police, investigators quickly realized who had been hiding from justice for 25 years. These are the only pictures of the suspect that I was able to find. The police obtained a warrant to take a DNA sample from Hussein, and this time his consent was not required. A comparative analysis showed a perfect match with the DNA samples taken from Milica's body. Based on this information, Hussein, who had established a family and fathered 4 daughters since the crime, was formally charged in the Milica van Doorn case. Hussein denied his guilt. At his trial, which began in 2018, he initially claimed that he was possessed by an evil spirit, and that is why he did not remember attacking Milica. But over time, he changed his strategy and claimed that he had a secret and very close relationship with Milica, which is why his DNA ended up in her body. According to him, he had just gotten married at the time, so he was hiding his relationship with Milica. But the judge did not believe him because Hussein made this statement only a year after his arrest, and because no one could be found to confirm that Milica and Hussein knew each other, let alone that there was an intimate relationship between them. Milica's immediate family spoke at the trial. One sister stated, "The man who did this kept quiet for years. He didn't reveal himself, didn't cooperate when police asked for DNA, continued to live unimpeded in the neighborhood, created a family with 4 daughters." She addressed the suspect by saying, "You are an unidentified man who ruined my life. It disgusts me that there are men like you who use women, throw them away like garbage, and then just go on living their lives." The other sister said the following words, "I had hoped that you would talk about your motives and Milica's last hours, but instead you came up with a completely implausible claim that you had a secret relationship with her and complained about how hard it was for you and your own family. But your family can visit you in prison if they want to. If I want to visit Milica, my only option is to go to her grave." She concluded, "Milica met her end in a terrible way, and so I hope for justice. She more than deserved it." It was a very emotional day for Milica van Doorn's family. When her father was offered to speak in court, he was full of anger and said, "If you keep your mouth shut for 25 years, you're a coward. The way Hussein treated Milica is extremely sickening. It's shocking when the police come to your house and tell you that someone has taken your child's life." According to the attorney, Milica's family lived in great fear for years because they didn't know whether this was a targeted act against the family or not. On December 11, 2018, based on DNA evidence, Hussein, who continued to deny any involvement in Milica van Doorn's case, was found guilty. He was found guilty of taking Milica's life, which, according to the court, was done to cover up the traces of another crime, a crime against sexual integrity. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The judge also ordered Hussein to pay 10,000 euros in compensation to Milica's family. Hussein himself refused to be present in the courtroom during the pronouncement of his sentence. He was taken to court, but chose to remain in a cell outside the courtroom. In February 2019, Hussein appealed his sentence, which resulted in his prison term being reduced from 20 years to 19 years and 7 months. His time in prison, however, was short-lived. On Sunday, June 13, 2022, Hussein was found dead. According to his lawyer's report, Hussein passed after a workout, and the resuscitation treatments given to him did not help.